Hello everyone and everything, and welcome back to more Hollow Knight. Last time we defeated the Hollow Knight's pure form here in Godhome, the pure vessel. And in doing so, achieved 112% completion here in the game, which is the last landmark we needed before we can make the dash to actually beating the game. Gods, oh gods, thy nature, mysterious, uncanny, even so for we who seek. By attuning ourselves we clutch at their greatness, their immortality, their unknowable splendor. Hallownest, this kingdom is blessed with true gods, true, all around the corpses of pretender gods, but not in Hallownest. Something very special about this. I wonder if that's meant to be a jab at other games. Probably, maybe not. Most likely not. Team Cherry are too good of sports for that. Anyway, if we want the 112% true completion achievement, all we have to do now is return to the Temple of the Black Egg and once again slay the Hollow Knight at its heart. But where would be the fun in that when we could shoot for greater heights? I want to start back up here in the Queen's Gardens near the White Lady, because the last time we visited her, she mentioned something very interesting to us. And that is as to why we see her sealed here, wrapped up in some sort of binding, here at the corner of the world, encased in a giant cocoon. She mentioned that it was because of her own regret, her shame that she feels for the part she played in what she called the deed. She wasn't too much more specific than that, but apparently it had something to do with her voracious desire to sow her seeds around the world, to propagate. And on that same note, I want to point out that there is only one other place in the entire world where we have seen roots like hers glowing with an unworldly light. And that is here in the Kingdom's Edge. And they tend to get larger and more intense the closer you get to the worm's cast-off shell. Unfortunately, we can't actually ever get back to the worm's shell. It is now covered in dust from when we received the King's brand, but you can see that the roots seem to originate from its position. Additionally, when we spoke to her when wearing the King's soul, she said, "What is at the heart of it, I wonder? If its curiosity wills it, it should seek out that place where it was born, where it died, where it began." And so that's exactly what we're going to do today, making sure we have King's Soul ready and equipped. Its description reads that it opens the way to a birthplace. And all signs point us here, to the bottom of the ancient basin. Beyond lies only the refuse and regret of the pure vessel's creation. We know now where those words pure vessel come from, and now we learn that the abyss was where he was created, but not just him. All around this place we see remnants and shells of vessels just like him, just like us. But now we finally have an idea of how they got here, and it is of course no coincidence that the shades around this place are called siblings and bear such a close resemblance to our own shades. And no coincidence that I finally get to talk about why he's called the Lost Kin. And by bringing the King's Soul to this place, we find caverns literally built from the husks of our fallen brethren. Be careful around here, as siblings are enemies, which do double damage. But if we defeat one more, we might get yet a little bit more taste of delicious lore. Far down below us, beneath the kingdom, the air grows stiller, and a sense of emptiness pervades. Can life flourish down there? If so, I will hunt it. This is the reality of where we are. Every single husk that we see is what remains of one of the children of the Pale King and the White Lady. Her seeds combined with him, we get one final arcane egg, And they created all this, and we see exactly what reason they had for such shame, why this area was sealed away, why the White Lady chose to bind herself. All this for the creation of the pure vessel? And to what end? Why would they do this? Was the infection truly that much of a threat that it required this much loss, this much decay? We have quite a bit of a labyrinth down here. But basically head down as far to the bottom right as you can, and you will find your goal around here. We see one of the eggs. This one reflects our face back at us. And we can see those void tendrils creeping in from the dark, infecting it, creating, well, us. No cost too great. No mind to think. No will to break. No voice to cry suffering. Born of God and void. You shall seal the blinding light that plagues their dreams. You are the vessel. You are the Hollow Knight. Our king's soul gets replaced with Void Heart. An emptiness that was hidden within, now unconstrained, unifies the void under the bearer's will. This charm is part of its bearer and cannot be unequipped. Well, it's a good thing it only costs 0 notches then, because otherwise we'd have a problem. As long as we have it equipped, any enemy born of void now poses no threat to us. That includes the siblings, the void essence, which would have otherwise been springing forth from these black pools here, and even our own shade. Not the collector nor the king's molds found in the White Palace, though. Though they were born from void, they are not quite pure void the way the Void Heart is. So, that sequence we just saw is pretty much undoubtedly our own memory. Seeing the corpses of our brothers falling from above, all in the hopes of discovering which of us was worthy to be called the pure vessel. And we heard these sort of requirements as we did so. No voice, no mind, no will. These are the things that the infection preys upon. So, theory holds, if you have a creature with absolutely no mind, its mind cannot be infected. Makes sense, so what did we just see? That was the process of the king standing here above it all, watching his own children claw their way up from the abyss. And if they showed any signs of emotion, any thoughts, possibly that he had his own dream nail, they were forced back down until one emerged that met his criteria, at which point he sealed the rest of us in to be forgotten. We know it worked. Trying to dream nail the pure vessel and the Hollow Knight yields nothing. And yet, he still failed. The White Lady once told us, its supposed strength was ill-judged. It was tarnished by an idea instilled. We've seen that idea. Perhaps it was feelings of pride or of fatherhood. But we saw when the pure vessel shared a moment with the Pale King after conquering the Path of Pain. As the pure vessel was being trained, all the hopes placed upon him instilled this idea in him. An idea which grew. As I said, the pure vessel having dream dialogue seemed to have been at least planned at one point. The idea is don't think, don't. The pressure of being everything that he wanted, of living up to the expectations of the kingdom, of his father. He had no choice but to try. But we do not have any such memories. We were not given any such time with the Pale King. Our darkness, as the Queen says, is unfettered. Our emptiness is absolute. We have what it takes to truly overcome the infection. But Hornet has told us in the past that she believes we're capable of more than that. Hornet told us that the darkness she sees within us gave her hope. And yet with that hope came a choice. Prolong the world's stasis, or face the heart of the infection. I'd urge you to take that harder path. But what end may come? The decision rests with you. And, thanks to the seer, we finally have an idea as to what exactly the infection is. It's no sickness, at least not in so many words. The seer confessed to us after we brought her 2,400 essence that once her tribe worshipped the light, but when the Pale King's rule began, they forsook that light, turned their back on it, and chose to forget it. And yet whispers remained, memories persisted, until all of Hallownest began to dream of that forgotten light. The infection is the light once worshipped by the moths. To them, it once provided light, life, and warmth. But after it was forsaken, it turned vengeful, began to haunt the dreams of many who we've met along our journey, eventually overtaking them, changing them, drawing them into its hive mind, forcing the bugs to do its bidding, to fight when they would otherwise be peaceful, to attack when they would rather flee, even to turn on friends. And so there's no question what we must do, given the option. We can't simply contain this infection. We must do all we can to truly defeat it. A familiar face waits for us here, now that we have Voidheart. The path is opened. One way or another, an end awaits inside. I won't be joining you in this. That space is built to sustain your likes. Its bindings would drain me were I to join. Don't be surprised. I'll not risk my life in your attempt, though if the moment presents, I'll aid as I'm able. Ghost of Hallownest, you possess the strength to enact an end of your choosing. Would you supplant our birth-cursed sibling, or would you transcend it? Of course, Hornet being born of the king and Hera, that makes her sort of our half-sister, a sibling in her own right. Could it achieve that impossible thing? Should it? I think we all know the answer to that. So let's do this one more time. Select your charms, and face the Hollow Knight. We're even more powerful than we were before. Not just by upgrades, but by experience as well. We have faced this guy's true form. His much weakened, much diminished, infected form has very little hold on us now. We know what to do. We know how to defeat him. And even if we didn't, simply wailing on him would accomplish a great deal as well. Once we get him down to Phase 3 and beyond, Hornet joins the fray and grants us access to his mind. Brighter even than Godhome, we are given the option to challenge. And be forewarned, those of you who have joined me on this journey in Steel Soul mode. Though this is a dream, dying here will spell the end of your run. The source of the infection, of this entire kingdom's decay, the Radiance, is the true final boss of Hollow Knight. And does she ever earn that title? This is a massive challenge of every skill you have learned: combat, platforming, management of your soul, and patience. Taking place across 5 different phases, and by far the largest arena we have ever seen. Phase 1 will take place primarily in this relatively basic arena, bottomless pits to either side, but otherwise nothing to look out for here. After dealing 350 damage, we'll move on to Phase 2, and the arena will begin to cover itself in spikes, 1/2 at a time, alternating sides every 5 seconds or so, or whenever the knight makes contact with them. Thankfully, since these spikes are more of a hazard of the arena than an attack of the Radiance, they only deal 1 damage, but you'll have to contend with them as you deal 400 more damage to get to Phase 3. Here, the spikes become permanent fixtures on the outside of the arena, though still disappearing momentarily should you ever make contact with them. 250 damage later, you'll be on to Phase 4, and all 3 of those phases were just a warm-up. You'll platform your way up to the upper section of the arena, a series of several floating platforms over a bottomless pit, stretching wide enough that at any point, you'll likely only see half of the platforms on screen. To pass this phase, you'll need to deal 700 more damage. Thankfully, you don't have any spikes to deal with. The final phase, the Ascent, only requires you to climb this extremely tall series of platforms while evading the attacks of the Radiance, and when you get to the top, land the final blow. But between the beginning and the end, she has a veritable arsenal of attacks to try and stop us with. She has the Solar Beams, the Sun Orbs, Sword Spiral, Sword Flurry, Sword Fall, Wall of Light, and Beam Assault. The Radiance is an entirely new kind of boss. Though many of her attacks are similar to some we've encountered before, they come together to form a fight that feels like an entirely new genre of challenge. Every one of her attacks either affects the entire arena or homes in on us regardless of our position. Because of that, her exact position almost wouldn't matter if it didn't dictate the starting positions of her Sword Spiral and Solar Beams. Beyond that, all we care about where she is whether or not we can hit her. And, for the first time ever, we have a boss whose actual body does not have a hitbox under any circumstances. We can directly come into contact her as much as we want and suffer no consequences, which, ironically, makes her the easiest boss to nail pogo in the game. And good thing too, because we are definitely gonna make use of that. But all that to say that this boss practically feels built from the ground up to encourage you to play patiently and wait for her to come to you. Approaching her through the absolute onslaught of projectiles can feel overwhelming, but let's dive in and make it all feel a little more manageable. The Solar Beams are essentially the exact same as the beams we dealt with when fighting the Crystal Guardian and the Enraged Guardian. The small sliver of light they begin as is not a hitbox, but a telegraph of where the hitbox will be, spreading out in a perfect pattern of 8. She'll always perform this attack 3 times in a row, but the exact rotation of each set seems a little bit random. One thing is certain, she'll never position the beams the same way twice in a row. This means you'll have to dodge the first set by reaction alone, but for the second and third, all you have to do is stand directly in a spot where a beam has just been fired, and you'll be safe 100% of the time. This gives you the easiest opportunity to either deal damage or heal out of any of her attacks, as you'll have the entire window of time between the second set of beams and her next attack, and odds are that you'll be in a great position to launch off an Abyss Shriek or two, racking up massive damage. The Sun Orbs are extremely comparable to the Soul Orbs used by the Soul Warrior, Soul Master, and others, but these are essentially a more powerful version, being faster, persisting for longer, and having a much tighter turning radius that makes evading them another matter entirely. Much like the Solar Beams, the Radiance will always summon 3 of these in a row, and honestly, their sheer persistence makes me consider this her most dangerous attack, at least in phases 1 and 2. You may also notice that this attack and many of her others aren't actually telegraphed by the Radiance herself, but rather require you to simply focus on the arena at large and be aware of how those attacks appear. Thankfully, the Sun Orbs have a pretty clear summoning animation, but as for dodging them, you definitely want to draw them into the ground. Whether or not you can is going to largely depend on the angle they're summoned at, and whether or not you want to get any damage in on the Radiance while she does this attack. If you just want to focus on dodging the orbs, I recommend primarily making use of your Shade Cloak and dodging back and forth along the ground to draw them downwards. Again, like the Soul Orbs, you can also simply destroy them by shadow dashing through them. If you want to get in some damage though, I recommend taking a lot of advantage of the Radiance's lack of a body hitbox, and jumping up to land a Nail Pogo on her head before falling back down to draw the orbs down into the ground. For a safer strategy, use Descending Dark after the Nail Pogo to give yourself extra insurance against the orbs and deal a little more damage. Soul permitting, of course. Mind you, that's all in phases 1 and 2. This attack is a very different beast in the platform arena of phase 4, though in many ways, it's a fair bit easier. You won't be able to dodge along the ground seeing as there isn't any, but the platforms cover a large variety of angles, and the orbs will often just crash into them without you having to worry too much about them. Be careful though, as a unique property of the Sun Orbs is that they can phase through platforms if the orb has only just started moving, as a sort of grace period. This attack is also the most dangerous if Radiance is off screen, as they can build up enough momentum to be extremely difficult to dodge when you're not anticipating them. So in phase 4, try not to let the Radiance out of your sight. The Sword Spiral is very similar to the Solar Beams, though she only summons 1 wave instead of 3. The trade-off is that there are 12 swords, not 8, and they all have these curving trajectories. And while all 12 swords in a set will curve in the same direction, either clockwise or counterclockwise, it's impossible to tell which way they'll go before they launch. Thankfully, it doesn't actually matter too much. If you're between 2 of their trajectories while close enough to the Radiance, their curve isn't steep enough to hit you, and if you're far enough away that it does matter, they move slowly enough that you have plenty of time to get out of the way. The biggest threat this attack poses is in phase 4, where sometimes the Radiance will spawn so close to you and use this attack that the sword's initial appearance before they launch will hit you. In this situation, there's really only one recourse, and that's to use Desolate Dive as soon as she appears directly above you to avoid the initial spawn, and then use the invincibility frames to position yourself safely between 2 swords. After all that, this is another good time to let loose with an Abyss Shriek. The Sword Flurry is probably most comparable to Grimm's Firestorm attack, sending wave after wave of projectiles at you horizontally. Thankfully, all from the same direction, but be aware that this attack can be initiated from either the left or the right. This attack changes quite a bit between the first 2 phases and the 4th phase. In phases 1 and 2, she will always summon 4 waves of swords, but in phase 4, she will only summon 2. Now, I want to lead by highly recommending that you always dodge through the large gaps between the swords, whether or not your Shade Cloak is available. While it is possible to dodge straight through the swords with a well-timed Shadow Dash, the timing of the swords is frequent enough that relying solely on the Shade Cloak will see you struggling between the columns of swords as you wait for it to recharge. And I say it's just much better to be in the habit of dashing through the gaps so you can avoid this attack without having to worry about watching your Shade Cloak cooldown. In addition, this is a good time to bring up the Radiance's attack frequency. She will essentially always use another attack before her last one is totally off screen, especially in the case of her sword attacks. So you want to be finished dodging them as quickly as possible to be prepared for the next attack. Of course, don't be afraid to Shadow Dash through the swords if you're in a tight spot. I just recommend not having that be your plan A. Swordfall is a particularly dangerous attack, functioning nearly identically to the Sword Flurry. The same 4 rows of swords, only vertical. Thankfully, these swords will only come from above, and never below. Actually, in many ways, I consider this to be the easier of the 2 attacks. For one, the Knight's hitbox has a smaller width than it does height, So while it's not possible to dodge between the smaller gaps in the swords coming horizontally, these vertical ones are a different story. The larger gaps will still definitely be easier, but be aware that if you don't have a choice but to try and slip through these thinner gaps, you might as well try. Also be careful of the hilts of the swords. They may look like little more than a design flourish, but the hitbox of the swords actually does get wider there. Swordfall is also the only attack that the Radiance will use in Phase 3, as well as being the only attack she actually drops in Phase 4. Because of this, and the fact that out of all of her attacks, it's the one that most restricts your horizontal movement, I also want to cover how best to avoid the floor spikes at this point. In general, it's pretty simple. Just stay on whatever side of the arena they're not on, right? They also give you a bit of a grace period if they begin spawning under your feet, taking an extra moment to appear if you're still in contact with the glowing ground. But sometimes, and often due to the swordfall attack, you'll be somewhat trapped on one side of the arena as spikes are spawning beneath you, and even I, the world's biggest proponent of nail pogos, can't in good conscience recommend nail pogoing your way to safety when there's so much going on. So here's our secret weapon against the spikes. As I said, they'll disappear if you make contact with them, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to take damage. Use a Descending Dark while over top of the spikes, and they'll disappear before your invincibility frames wear off, giving you some extremely valuable breathing room before the spikes reappear on the other side of the stage. Even if you don't have any soul to spare, remember that the spikes only do 1 damage, contrary to every one of Radiance's attacks. And if it comes down to the choice between taking 2 damage from an attack, or taking 1 damage and removing the spikes for a second, it's really no contest. As for dealing with Swordfall in Phase 3, it's pretty simple. Just jump and land 1 upward slash in between every row of swords, using the jump to reposition yourself to the next gap you want to use. Don't feel too pressured to get in an attack between every row. This right here is the entire phase. She's not going anywhere. So if the nails are leaving inconvenient gaps that have got you locked to one side, just wait it out. You'll get your chance. It can also be very tempting to unleash some Abyss Shrieks during this phase, seeing as she's right there and not moving, but I recommend against it. The time between phases 3 and 4 is just about the only completely safe opportunity you'll have to heal in this whole fight, and it lasts long enough that you could genuinely heal 6 masks if you have the soul. So just use phase 3 to build up that soul just by dealing damage with your nail. Even if you're at full health and you don't need to heal, I still recommend hoarding your soul right now, as this is already one of her shortest phases, and letting loose with your spells in phase 4 can make that phase much quicker and easier. The Wall of Light is comparable to the Traitor Lord's Shockwave, as one of the only attacks which outright requires the use of invincibility to dodge, covering the stage from top to bottom, moving from one end to the other. The only thing that can halt its progress is if the Radiance immediately follows it up with a second one. If she does that, the first wall will disappear about halfway across the stage, but you'll still have the second one to deal with. Either way, you're not getting out of this without either Shade Cloaking through or using a Descending Dark. Much like the Sword Flurry, this is another attack you want to dodge as quickly as possible, as you don't want to be stuck on the wrong side of it waiting for your Shade Cloak to recharge when she follows up with a second attack, especially if that second attack is a Sword Flurry from the other direction. Yikes. So, if your Shade Cloak is on cooldown and you see the wall coming, it's definitely worth it to burn a Descending Dark, even if she's not in the range of its damage. Her final attack, Beam Assault, is only used in Phase 5, and it's the only attack she uses. It's basically a single beam out of the solar beams, only over and over and over again, targeted in your direction and slightly wider. She'll basically pester you with this attack during the entire ascent. On paper, it's really simple. It has a pretty decent telegraph. It takes until you're about halfway up the climb until it starts properly targeting you directly, and they're not especially rapid. But what this attack preys on is your adrenaline. After getting through all 4 of her previous phases, your hands are shaking, your heart is pounding. Every individual beam feels 10 times faster than it actually is. So as much as I know that, and as much as I've personally experienced it, I can't give any better advice than to take a slow, measured approach to the final climb. Stand still on each platform and move accordingly with each beam that she fires. When you get to the top, don't hesitate. All it takes is one attack to finish this. So, our game plan. This fight is honestly as difficult as you make it. The Radiance plays on your greed, your impatience. In phases 2 and 4, she often hovers over top of spikes or tiny platforms over bottomless pits. It's as if she knows she's somewhere you'd have to take a risk to reach, but still, she just hovers there, as though she's saying, "Come and get me." Well, our greatest asset in what would otherwise be the trickiest situations is Descending Dark. Faced with an opponent whose primary strategy seems to be to teleport away and then fill the screen with different projectiles and hitboxes, oftentimes all we have to do is close the distance with a Descending Dark, avoiding projectiles, removing spikes, and dealing damage all at once. Of course, much like many of our past foes, we'll need to get in our slashes to feed our hungry soul meter. But Radiance is surprisingly simple to stay up close to. The only two attacks which actually originate from her are her solar beams and her sword spiral, both of which are heavily telegraphed by her glowing brightly. If she's not glowing, you can essentially stay in her bubble and keep wailing on her. The biggest struggle then comes from the fact that she constantly teleports out of reach, starting the cycle over. In truth, there are really two ways to go about this fight. Either wait for her to come to you, or bring the fight to her. Don't feel the need to commit to either strategy. From moment to moment, just use whichever one you need based on her positioning, whether or not you have enough soul to use Descending Dark, and so on. Phase 4 is definitely the toughest of them all, asking you to balance your platforming skills with your attack evading skills as she repeatedly flees to the far reaches of this massive arena. My main recommendation is to stay on the top central platform whenever you're not pursuing Radiance or dodging. Don't overextend yourself by chasing her to the furthest platforms. If she does appear over there, just move close enough that you keep her on screen so you can avoid any sword spirals or sun orbs. If she appears on one of the closer platforms, close in, possibly using Descending Dark, and then let her have it. Pay attention to how she transitions to her final phase, using this teleport that leaves a trail of particles moving upwards. While it's not as completely safe as a gap between phases 3 and 4, this is your last opportunity to heal. So if you do have any soul left, you might as well, as this far down, her beam assault is incredibly unlikely to hit you. More importantly, do not try to heal further up the ascent, no matter how possible it seems. You've come this far, conquered so much. Now's not the time for second guessing. Make the climb, and finish strong. And we begin. It is so amazing, everything that builds up to this fight. There are so many secrets that lead to so many players not even knowing that she is in the game. It takes both truly an explorative mind and a battle-tested will to reach this point. But we have made it, and now only one option stands before us. Win or lose it all. I just failed to follow my own advice and only hit her on this round, but it's so tempting. That's for my siblings. The darkness is attempting to take hold of her as we weaken her, but she has still got a lot of fight left in her. During this phase, it actually is possible to dream nail her, but it is extremely difficult considering how high she floats off the ground. You'll most likely not see, any of the dialogue she has to offer here. But if you get just to the right spot, that wasn't it. She has a number of unique dialogues that she can play, calling us an ancient enemy, saying she does not fear us. I should definitely fear her, because that was a brutal combination of me getting hit right before I fell down. But you know something, Radiance? I don't fear you either. She gives us a lot of extra space here in this upper part of the arena. Gosh, how absolutely anticlimactic would it be if I did lose this here? Ooh, that was cool. That was really cool. I didn't even see the ground. That was just pure risk. She is giving me a lot more trouble than I was anticipating, though, that's for sure. Oh, don't do it. This is one fight that is very difficult to practice. She had no presence. Oh, goodness, come on. Thank you. She had no presence in Godhome. At least not that we know of. Really? I'm gonna need you to let me heal a little bit. Oh, I was not anticipating to struggle this part. No, okay. Our siblings are joining us in the climb. They know what purpose they were made for. And though their inception was cruel, there's only one enemy we can take it out on. And this is for Mila. The Pure Vessel joins us as well, ripping her apart as we reveal our true form. And finish this. And that does it. We have truly beaten this game. And what an incredible journey. I've said it before and I'll say it many, many times again. I cannot say enough good about this game. Everything that Team Cherry has achieved here just constantly makes me come back for more. No matter how many times I've beaten this game, no matter how deeply I've gotten into its extra content, I'd never want it to end. Doing this project was a lot, in part, due to me just trying to give this game as much completion as I felt that I was able. Though, I know the credits haven't finished rolling, but I do have to admit, we are not yet done. Though that beats the game at 112%, there are still a few things we can chase, a number of achievements we have not yet achieved. But in the meantime, we're going to bask in what we have accomplished. That is an insanely good final boss. A super boss almost in its own right. And I love that that's the case. There are certain games out there, I won't name any names right now, but going way out of your way to absolutely complete them causes the true final boss to be a bit anticlimactic, what with you being so powerful and so practiced. Not here. This game gives you one last incredible challenge to sink your teeth into, and I would not have it any other way. But that does it here. We played skillfully and proved we had a steel soul. We'll meet again with a new challenge for you. We get pure completion for beating the game with 112%. Took me just 35 hours, you know. Nothing too major. But that is going to do it for today. I will see you guys next time, when we see just what Hallownest still has to offer.